Today I want to do an altcoin update going over what we're seeing within the altcoin market as we have just gotten our third consecutive rate cut. Is this going to benefit altcoins? What is next for us? What could we see in 2026? All of that type of good stuff. We'll first off start at taking a look at the immediate impacts. What are we seeing on the heels of this third rate cut as we're going into the end of the year? Well, first off, you will see here that we're actually kind of a majority down today on the market. The only kind of notable difference here is we can see that the midnight token is actually up very, very substantially from what we saw yesterday. Yesterday, it made lows about 2.5 cents. It launched, I believe, at like 11 cents. So it was down about 70% yesterday. It's up about 70% today. So we are seeing that, things are looking pretty decent so far for the kind of rebound of the midnight token, which is good to see. But as you will see, basically with most of the other things, we are seeing a red day today. This isn't necessarily too surprising just because we saw a little bit of a green day yesterday. We had kind of a little bit of some pumps all around, kind of on or in anticipation of the rate cut. But generally, these rate cuts are well forecasted in over time. There's really isn't anything too crazy going on near or around the events of the rate cuts, just because it's so well speculated on, and there's maybe a little bit of moves by some market makers trying to wipe some over leveraged traders, but nothing really else too much after that. Well, if we go ahead and look, you can see, of course, we had those 3 rate cuts. Well, in the next 1 to 2 weeks, President Trump will select the next Fed chair, and the next Fed chair is very, very, very likely to be dovish. Now, there's a couple of different things circulating here on the market that I want to just make very, very clear. The first thing is that the Fed chair does not unilaterally set rates. One of the things that was actually really interesting about this rate cut is that there were 3 people who dissented from the current level of rate cuts, meaning that there are kind of multiple different views of what should be happening with the Fed's monetary policy. So just because we get a Fed chair in that says the rate should be 0%, doesn't mean that everybody else of the 11 boards of governors are going to be going along and agreeing with this. So that is something that we need to just make very clear, is that the Fed chair doesn't unilaterally set rates. So just because one that is dovish comes in does not mean we will be getting a 100 basis point rate cut the next meeting after they're appointed. So that is one thing that I wanted to just make very clear, just so you guys are kind of understanding how that works. However, the Fed chair essentially speaks for the Fed itself, right? So even if they are dovish, it is going to be something that will give a better kind of overall sense coming from the Fed than if they are kind of hawkish. So that is something that we should just keep a very, very close eye on to see kind of how the market shifts around this kind of changing news regarding Jerome Powell and the replacement of the Fed chair. Now, the next thing I want to take a look at, as we're starting to see some of these things shift over the past couple of days, is I think the market is already trying to get an early kind of level of pricing in on what we're seeing happening right now for the Fed, because we're seeing actually if ETH Bitcoin is actually breaking up well above this kind of descending trend line that we had seen established kind of starting back in August. If we go ahead and we kind of look at what happened, you can see here that Ethereum was down. We did find the bottom, and then we found a really, really strong kind of push back to the upside here, actually breaking through some of the kind of highs that we saw prior to this final capitulation. And then after that, we have been in a pretty consistent and a pretty clean downtrend here that we have recently broken out of, looking like we may be seeing something like this coming through, and maybe we get a next level of kind of moves up from Ethereum like we were seeing kind of in this last month, or this last kind of multi-month chunk going from about April to that August timeframe where we did see the top. So there is that possibility that potentially we see something similar happen. Maybe it's between kind of like now and March. March is when that new Fed chair comes in. So we could see kind of a lot of speculation and hype coming up until that appointment. And then we could see another kind of drawdown similar to what we saw here. Again, this is purely me speculating. I don't actually know for sure what's going to happen. I cannot predict the future, but I think something like that could potentially make sense. But it is very clear to see, of course, that we do have a very clear and strong move coming from the ETH Bitcoin chart. ETH is actually outperforming Bitcoin, or at least it's starting to outperform Bitcoin, at least over the past several weeks. That is, of course, very interesting to see. The next levels, of course, we do have some kind of key levels at which we should expect to see some level of resistance. It does look like we may have already started to see a little bit of that up at the 0.37 range. And then, of course, after that would be like the 0.38, like 0.384 range. And after that, we're like 0.405. So that is kind of what we'd be wanting to be looking for. And after that, we're going to 0.44. And then, there's plenty of, support and resistance, and there's plenty of data and history to show kind of some of the key levels at which we would be running into support or resistance, going all the way up to about 0.088. It's kind of the recent highs that we saw back in 2021 and 2022. So that is, of course, kind of what we'll be looking for. So that is, of course, a major thing that we want to kind of keep an eye on as we see this whole Fed saga play out. What does this mean for altcoins? What does this mean? Of course, the ETH Bitcoin, in my opinion, is going to be an early indicator of what this could mean. Now, let's go ahead and let's check out some of our other major altcoins that we like to talk about, and we can go ahead and just do a kind of a quick review of what we've got going on here. So first off, you can see ICP. It did have the continuous kind of sell-off after that major pump. We are seeing a little bit of a jump over the past day or so, with the price coming back down already. So we'll have to see kind of, is this the bottom? Do we go all the way back to previous lows? Very, very hard to say for sure. We will just kind of wait and see, and we'll figure it out. So, and that is kind of what we're seeing with ICP. Volume does continue to go down. Search does continue to go down. Again, we are not in a really strong altcoin market, so the fact that this is happening isn't super surprising. Again, just given the fact that ICP is not really, it hasn't really held up quite well just in overall price action. None of this is too surprising, at least in my mind. Now, if we go ahead and we look at ZEC, again, ZEC is one that I have found, very, very interesting, and I still remain very bullish on. You will see here, we did have that pump to get back above this orange line. We are currently settling on the orange line. Given the weakness that we are seeing from altcoins, it wouldn't surprise me too much if we did see a break below this orange line. Again, we want to continue to see kind of the higher lows coming in here. So if we do break below, we just really wouldn't want to get back down to like the 00216 range. Is kind of my expectation and what I would be looking to see. And then, of course, as time continues, I can actually drag this line out even further just so we can see, kind of where the line comes over time that we do need to break above, because we are continuing to see this descending trend line where the lows have continued to be kind of lower highs. And then, of course, we have seen, some lower lows coming in as well. If we were to kind of take a very large brush approach to kind of what we're seeing here, we could see kind of maybe a little bit of like a descending wedge type of situation coming in here. Again, that's not really it's not a super strong structure, so I'm not going to definitively say that's what it is, but we can kind of see that is how it looks. The lower highs are definitely on a steeper slope than the lower lows are, so eventually we would expect that to break in some direction or the other, if that is kind of the structure that continues to form. So we'll have to see if we get a kind of a lower low that follows along the same general trend line. Then I think we'd have a little bit more confidence that is something that is happening. Now, moving on, let's go ahead and take a look at Kaspa, because on Kaspa, you will also see a similar type of thing. We had this kind of descending trend line going down. This actually wasn't like a descending wedge. This was just a full-on descending trend line. We broke out, we've broken above it, and now we are kind of sort of doing a little bit of another kind of we could call it maybe a descending wedge, maybe even a descending channel. And then, of course, we'll have to see kind of what happens here next. Again, this is a much smaller wedge than what we've seen in the past. If we were to take something like this, and then we're probably taking something like this, again, getting a much smaller version of that descending wedge. Completely up to you if this is something that is, kind of a substantial enough structure for you to trade on or not. But if you do think that this is a descending wedge and you expect that we could see a break out to the upside, we are at the very, very bottom here. So there is kind of like a low risk, high reward from a risk reward ratio that you can see here from a trade. Now, again, you need to make your own decisions there. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not telling you how to trade, when to trade, why to trade, all that type of stuff. This is just something that I am kind of noticing as we take a look at the chart here. Now, again, just given the overall weakness that we are seeing through altcoins, I do think that this is a structure that could result in a break to the downside potentially. But in the short term, we might see another run back up towards the top of this trend line before we see that rejection here. So again, we'll have to see. Again, I cannot tell the future, so I don't know exactly what is going to happen. Now, next thing I want to take a look at is Zcash. Zcash is one that we've been talking about recently. we have seen finally that break through that descending trend line that we were seeing for a while. We're starting to see kind of an established uptrend coming in. Again, continuous higher highs, and again, continuous higher lows. Similar type of thing here. You'll see the higher highs. You'll also see the higher lows. It almost looks like it's kind of a, doing a bit of an expanding thing, or it's kind of maybe in like a channel. We'll let you decide kind of exactly what you think we're seeing here is. But I do think it is fairly clear to see that we are in an uptrend pattern, which is good to see. Now, in my opinion, this is a very, very strong chart, and it's looking really nice because what you will see if we zoom out here, really, really strong move up, predictable and somewhat necessary move back here to the downside, get a nice little retrace. You'll see we settle on kind of the previous kind of major swing high prior to the one after that. We settle on that level, and now we are continuing to develop kind of a little bit of an uptrend here. This, in my opinion, is a very, very strong structure, and it looks really, really good. So in my opinion, things looking really actually quite nice for Zcash, even though we are in a little bit of a difficult kind of altcoin environment. This is still looking very good to me. So we'll go ahead, we'll take a look at it and just kind of see how that goes. The last thing I want to take a look at here is also a new entrant here, which is the night cryptocurrency. So again, we're going to go off of day, and we're probably going to go down to hourly, just because it just barely launched. You'll see here, we saw the launch coming in. I think it actually started at 11 cents. We saw a little bit of a move. I guess it started at, where did it start? About 10.5 cents ish. Did a little bit of a run up here to about 11.6 cents, and then we see just an absolute smashing crash down here to about 3.5 cents. Since then, we have actually seen a pretty consistent, like kind of stable bid to the upside here, which is definitely good to see. So it's nice to see that we are starting to see a bottom, or it looks like we did find a bottom for the night token, and then it will continue to move back to the upside. As you will see in the crypto bubbles, it has seen a pretty nice move up over the past 24 hours or so, which of course we can see here on the chart. So we'll have to see. Night is kind of like the it is kind of the opus for the Cardano team and for Charles Hoskinson and everybody like that. So we'll have to see exactly kind of what happens with the night token. I do think it is definitely one to pay attention to, and it's one to see kind of how it tracks over the next little while, because I do think something like that will give a approximation for kind of the appetite for altcoins and what we could see happening in the altcoin market over the coming little while. So that is something that I'm going to be looking at very, very closely, and we'll see kind of exactly what goes on there. Hopefully you found the information in the video useful. If you are, of course, looking to get started trading, anything like that, I do have some of those affiliate links in the description below. BTCC is currently still doing that 500 USDT giveaway split between 2 lucky winners. So if you're interested and want to throw your hat in the ring there, just feel free to get signed up for BTCC. They are also doing that 10% bonus on first time deposits, which is a sweet deal. So if you're interested, feel free to check that out. Otherwise, that is all I've got for today. Feel free to drop any comments, questions, anything that you might have. I do try to read and respond to all of those. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.